However, when it comes to trafficking, there's a very broad spectrum, not only of the different types, but also a spectrum of intensity. So a lot of people in the public have an idea of what they think trafficking is. Again, specifically focusing on child trafficking. All right, welcome to the Digital Defenders United podcast. I'm Kim Kelley, survivor, advocate, and founder of Digital Defenders United. And today's guest is someone who's breaking barriers in one of the most overlooked areas of the anti-trafficking movement, language access. So joining us is Ludmila Golovine, Mila to many, President and CEO of MasterWord, one of the top-ranked language solutions companies in the world. She's fluent in Russian, French, and English, a powerhouse entrepreneur, and a pioneer in trauma-informed interpreting for human trafficking interdictions. So Mila, I am honored to have you here. I have so many questions for you. I want to first thank you for joining me and for everything you do to protect survivors and build bridges across cultures. So let's start from the beginning. What made you decide to bring trauma-informed solutions to the world of translation?
Well, my journey began as an interpreter about 35 years ago. And I worked as an interpreter in some of the Child Protective Services encounters and I actually ended up becoming a victim of vicarious trauma. I didn't know what it was. And I seek mental health at the time, and found myself in the Barnes and Nobles looking at what is this so-called thing, vicarious trauma. So my journey of introducing this work or with this work comes from my interpreting experience. And we ended up building and creating a lot of programs for interpreters on dealing with vicarious trauma and effects of vicarious trauma. And at the time, obviously 30, 25 years ago, the word human trafficking was not a word even used in the conversations. And through the years, I became an advocate and, volunteer and advocate in the anti-human trafficking work. And I realized how few interpreters understand and realize what human trafficking is. So how to recognize the signs of human trafficking. And then we launched trainings for interpreters how to recognize and report human trafficking, because interpreters work in schools, interpreters work in hospitals, interpreters work across all variety of government services that are being provided today. And not many people know, but about 25 million people in America, American citizens, don't speak English well. They're considered limited English proficient. Around New York, I believe we speak about 800 languages. We have worked in over 400 languages. We have a lot of indigenous languages spoken. And of course, we have a deaf and hard of hearing population that uses American Sign Language and variety and other different sign languages that we encounter here in the United States. So the another very important piece of that is interpreters very often come in very difficult situations, and being trauma informed is not something that many of the interpreters know what that is. What happens is we have on the one side providers that are not very culturally informed, and on the other side interpreters who are not very trauma informed. And so bridging that gap and we actually created a certificate program right now, a trauma-informed interpreting certificate program that has been now approved and also accepted by the Certification Commission of Healthcare Interpreters. And the program focuses on giving interpreters the skills so that they can be an equal partner of the care team during very complex encounters that we face.
Very interesting. So for people to understand, how do you define vicarious trauma? I've heard the term secondary trauma. Is that, you mean the trauma that you experience as a third party that's helping to deal with the situation? Is that correct?
Well, there are different types of trauma, right? And what is interesting is that every person exposed to trauma gets affected by it. So even when you go to a movie and you watch the main character in the movie get hurt, very often you kind of react to that person being hurt. Vicarious trauma is a form of secondary trauma. It is the way that we basically put on the hat of what happened to somebody else, but never take that hat off. But interpreters experience vicarious trauma differently than other providers, and the reason why is because when they take the message in one language and then they convert the message into a concept, because not all concepts translate directly. To hit a home run in some languages, you have to start. In America, they play a sport called baseball, right? So you have to come up with a different expression for that same concept. And in the process of that conversion from one language to another, that trauma, the effect of the trauma ends up being a lot deeper than just in even witnessing the trauma. So interpreters experience it on a completely different level.
That's really interesting. So, what made you aware of this gap in what's available and what we need when it comes to combating human trafficking and making sure translators are not only trauma informed, but that we're able to give them the resources they need to deal with their trauma?
Well, it came from my personal experience and from me looking for resources and then finding that at that time nothing was available, and making sure that we start those conversations with interpreters and create training for interpreters. But at the same time, your audience, I believe, is largely providers and people who are, in the field fighting against human trafficking. Very often, interpreters that we work with don't even know human trafficking exists, or especially they may be called for the first time for an assignment. Or you may call an interpreter who is an over the phone interpreter, and they just interpreted, I don't know, for a business meeting or for a pediatric appointment at a hospital. So when you're suddenly in a trafficking encounter or interpreting in a encounter that either let's take a typical child protective services appointment, right? Let's say in a forensic interview or an investigative interview, interpreters may not understand what's taking place. Why is the interviewer asking the same question over and over in different ways? Well, the interpreter may not know that the memory is broken, right? That the timeline is broken. They may go, oh, I already interpreted that question before, right? And why? So explaining to interpreters that you cannot really omit certain things, that sometimes, let's say in a business setting, we're trained to filter out the cuss words, right? Somebody uses a bad word, you kind of normally, almost habitually, would want to filter out an insult. Well, in a human trafficking interpreting, every word matters because every word is a clue to the interviewer, even the type of cuss word somebody uses, even the type of information somebody emits. So you have to interpret with a lot more consideration for what goes in the setting. Or a situation where, let's say again, it's an interview and suddenly, or let's say a provider or a law enforcement investigator is working with an abuser, and he may be siding with an abuser and going, yeah, she was really cute, right? I totally see it. Well, an interpreter may feel disgusted about it and may, want to walk out of the situation, not realizing that it's a recorded setting and maybe that's a way to get a confession. So it's very, very important that an interpreter comes in prepared, knowing what to expect, knowing what the goals and objectives are of the team, and knowing what they'll be facing.
That's so interesting, and I completely understand that. I haven't personally been in that type of interrogation situation involving human trafficking, but I can absolutely see where that would fit. So, what are some of the most common challenges your team faces when working alongside law enforcement or social services in trafficking interdictions?
Well, one of the most common challenges is, unfortunately, the breadth of the population that is affected, and meaning the breadth of languages that, we all know about Spanish, but the last few years, you've heard about unaccompanied minors, right, in the news. What you may not heard about them, a lot of them came from Latin America Guatemala, and a lot of them spoke indigenous languages. And language identification is one of the challenges. And how do you identify a language when A, you don't know what language a person speaks, B, it's an indigenous language, and C, among those communities, for example, you have very low literacy rates. So they cannot, literally read and write. So that's some of the challenges faced, and having to come up with creative ways of figuring out language identification tool, understanding where the person may be coming from. On the other side, some of the challenges are that providers may not fully be aware of the cultural issues, right? Culture is part of it. And we know there's a whole culture in quote unquote human trafficking, right? The way survivor may react to a certain situation is not the same as, let's say, a person who was not subjected to that might react. So certain set of rules. But now it may be, let's say, somebody from an Asian culture. And how do you deal with that without becoming a full cultural anthropologist, right? So is a smile a sign of happiness or a sign of stress? Or is a smile the way, and in some cultures, for example, smile can be a sign of high distress. Western culture, a lot of American cultures, this is the way you say yes. But did you know that in Bulgaria, this is a way you move your head for no? Hand gestures are different. Avoiding eye contact. I see in a lot of trainings, if a person is avoiding eye contact, that might be a sign of distress. But in certain cultures, it's a sign of respect. And kids are taught, don't look me in the eyes, if you're talking to me. Relationship with hair. For example, if somebody comes to you in a course of treatment, let's say chemotherapy, they'll tell you, or some kind of treatment will shave your hair. I wouldn't think twice about it. Okay. They're going to shave my hair. But in certain cultures, hair is a symbol of vitality. And you actually, as a doctor, is going to take away my ability to recover if you take my hair away. So there's a whole additional complexity that comes on top of already complex situation when trying to deliver care without re-traumatization to survivors of trafficking and abuse.
Let's start with zooming out. How do you define human trafficking? I'm asking because obviously I work in this realm. I'm a survivor of 20 years of not only cult abuse, but also child trafficking. My work is very focused on child exploitation and trafficking in the United States. Now, on the spectrum of intensity of exploitation, that can mean a lot of different things. However, not all exploitation is trafficking, right? All of trafficking is exploitation or abuse. But that being said, the spectrum of trafficking itself is a whole world. And when you broaden that beyond children to all the different ways adults can be trafficked, it's a whole different universe. So, how do you define it? And how have you seen people, the other professionals you work with, whether it's law enforcement or medical care or other social services, how do they define it? What's the broadened understanding of what trafficking is?
Well, that's a very loaded question that you asked me, right? You have this classical definition where somebody is trafficked if it's through coercion and a form of abuse, and of course there's labor trafficking and sex trafficking and organ harvesting and many other ways of other ways of trafficking. And the if we were to simplify it, if a person is asked to do so for sex trafficking, if a person is coerced, engage in sexual acts against their will, and I'm going, well, that's a very broad spectrum, against their will or not. Sometimes girls may think that they really want that, and but against their will, or if they're brainwashed to engage in that, or in case if people are not being paid for what they do, or if their documents are being taken away, right? So you're correct, there's this very broad spectrum of what is trafficking. Yeah, if you were to simplify it, as if a person is engaging in acts against their will or against what something would be considered their normal behavior. I know I'm not going with the classical definition of it.
Well, it's something that is not classically defined. So that's why I always ask different organizations I get involved with, well, how do you define trafficking? because I want an understanding of, what are we even talking about here? And again, depending on which community I'm interacting with. For you and your team, obviously translation services come into play mostly for people who don't speak English when you're in the United States. And I'm assuming you work all over the world, so
There's
that
a
can
lot of American citizens that don't speak English.
right.
You,
We
you
can
can
assume some of them have been brought here from other places. Some of them may be here in a very controlled environment that has prohibited them from learning English. So there's all these nuances, and I describe it this way to help people understand the broad spectrum while keeping it rather defined. Because personally, I think that by defining things, that's how we can effectively craft strategies to address these problems. However, when it comes to trafficking, there's a very broad spectrum, not only of the different types, but also a spectrum of intensity. So, a lot of people in the public have an idea of what they think trafficking is. Again, specifically focusing on child trafficking, most people think that it's children being kidnapped, and that's not the case statistically. So, helping people to understand the broad yet defined definition of trafficking, I feel, is important because it's not a one size fits all problem. Therefore, there's not a one size fits all solution. We need a multi layered approach. So, one of the reasons I founded this nonprofit is to unite the experts and the various realms of expertise that are needed in this fight. We need to be talking together cohesively between law enforcement and medical professionals and care providers and translation services and aftercare, all these different realms of levels of expertise that are needed. So, again, I want to thank you guys for what you're doing. And I know it's quite a complex situation, not only because of all the different nuances of each situation, but also because you're essentially charting uncharted territory in this realm. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I also want to correct one misconception. There is a pretty large number of people that do not and will not speak English. Let's talk about the deaf community. The deaf community, their first language is, in a majority of them, American Sign Language. And that is their language, and that is the language spoken in the United States. We have some indigenous communities here in the US. They spoke other languages before. So not everybody is a tourist or was brought in and didn't choose to learn English. I want people to be aware also that people interact differently in different languages, and the dynamic of interaction, let's say if you interact in English, you're going to interact in one way, but if you switch to another language, you will interact another. And there were studies made when people were asked to, for example, arrange pictures in the order of time, just a timeline, and they arrange them left to right in English, and they arrange them top to bottom in an Asian language, because that's how you go. Let's say in Chinese, you arrange top to bottom. So our brain thinks differently in another language. That's a very fascinating way to look at things. And actually, when providers are working with a survivor, they may use that to be able to establish that line of communication. Another important part is when we're stressed, we regress, right? Regression goes all the way sometimes to infant, sometimes to teenage years, etc., depending on where a person is. And sometimes we're curled up and like in the fetal position. But something that happens at the time when we're either regressing or we're outside of that window of tolerance is our hearing is affected, our speech is affected, our cognitive ability is affected. And I have seen people from being able to speak fluent English to completely only be able to communicate suddenly in their language of their childhood. I've seen those situations as well. They're not able to express themselves, even though they may have obtained a university degree and wrote a paper or papers, PhD thesis, let's say in English. They're suddenly not able to communicate. And that's because stress affects our cognitive abilities in different ways. So the need for that language communication can come at different times for different reasons, and it's pretty fascinating.
It is. Yeah, there's a lot of complexity to this entire topic. So it's I enjoy unpacking it for the sake of understanding and for the sake of raising the public's awareness of, again, what are we even discussing here and what are the different problems so that we can implement various solutions to meet those needs. So you've worked at the intersection of business and advocacy and social justice for decades. How have you seen the anti-trafficking field evolve, and where are we still falling short?
Well, first of all, I have seen the anti trafficking field come up and evolve to what it's today. So it's amazing. It's a movement now. It's a movement of NGOs. It's a lot of advocacy activities. There's a lot of laws being passed. But one of the things where we are falling short, I believe, is we are still the general public awareness. People go, it's something in the movie. It's something like it's a movie taken. They're not realizing that you may be passing somebody affected by trafficking or being trafficked on your way, to school every day. That kid who is best dressed, who has the cleanest haircut and answers every question correctly in your classroom may be severely sexually abused at home. You may not be aware of that unless you learn how to recognize those signs. And that's why I think for schools, for teachers, for healthcare professionals, it's important to be that first line of defense. We think a trafficker is the gangster person. Well, in familial trafficking, and I'm sure, Kim, you know the numbers very well, a lot of the times a mother or a parent is the trafficker. So, again, pediatric encounters. And the numbers for the average number of a trafficking victim is 12, right? The keyword is average. That means there's a lot of little kids who are being trafficked, in addition to people who are over the age of 18. So I think the work is just starting. The part that I would like to see happen is where, yes, there is a lot of work being done, but I think most every American works somewhere. And I would like to see where businesses take a bigger stand and a bigger role, and where every company adopts zero trafficking. Like, we're part of Texas Business Against Trafficking. I would like to see where every company adopts anti-human trafficking down their supply chains, no slave labor. And I actually prefer that we call it, it is slave labor in the supply chains, where every business adopts zero child sexual abuse material on corporate networks and devices. And today there are great tools. There's NetClean, and there's Store and other software that comes, with basic security installation packages, and where every employee is educated what is human trafficking, what is sex trafficking, what is child sex trafficking, and HR departments start playing a bigger role, to where you actually, if you engage in child sexual abuse material in a corporate network or device, you can lose your job, or you can go to what similar to like defensive driving training program, educational program about what is trafficking. If you say, oh, it was just by accident, I didn't know what it was. But I would like to see businesses take a bigger role and a proactive role in both educating our communities and enforcing what is already, illegal.
I love the enforcement of the law because it drives me a little bit crazy when new bills are signed. I call it, new pictures and papers are signed and pictures are taken to make some other form of something that's already illegal more illegal. And like, look, child sex abuse material is already illegal. If anybody is found with it, whether or not you're on a work device, that is illegal. So not only should you lose your job, the law should be enforced in those situations. I agree that it would be a greater deterrent to be more vocal and outspoken and have a more aggressive policy. Maybe aggressive is too much of a word there, but what I'm saying is that we should be very emboldened when it comes to protecting the innocent. It should not be something we're afraid to talk about. So I'm going to stay off that soapbox because I know you and I are both very passionate about calling people to action. But you understand what I'm saying when it comes to especially crimes against children or internet laws or trafficking, it is already illegal. We don't necessarily need more laws. Now, there are some realms that do have some gaps in where certain laws for example, harsher punishments or more protection for survivors are absolutely needed. But in general, the bad things are already illegal, in my opinion, because I completely agree with you. We need more education and more prevention. We need to talk about it more in a way that helps prevent it better, not for the sake of, implementing useless policies, but for the sake of actually enforcing the law. Now, child sex abuse material is something that I go hard on. I'm very focused on it. And honestly, I don't see a lot of nonprofits that are focused on it. I do see a lot of nonprofits that call themselves anti-trafficking, raise millions of dollars in the name of combating trafficking, and they're actually just anti-porn. So that's a whole other realm. And it's not something, pornography is not something that I defend or want to advocate for or think is a healthy thing for society at all. It is not. However, there's a very big difference in consenting adults and what consenting adults do versus child exploitation. Now, in my opinion, I'd love your thoughts on this. In my opinion, the sooner we draw that line in the cement, because child sex abuse material is already illegal. Nobody should have a debate as far as whether or not it's something we should allow in society. It is not constitutionally protected, etc. There are far less nuances when it comes to whether or not the person consented to it, like in the realm of adult sexual entertainment. But again, it is not child pornography. There's nothing pornographic about a child. That is objectively something that is wrong and harmful and illegal. So if we, the people, were to focus our efforts when it comes to, again, why I focus on digital safety, when it comes to the realm of combating exploitation, I believe child sex abuse material, or CSAM, is the first domino that needs to tip because it's already illegal, because it is objectively wrong. Like somebody tried to debate me and say it's not, right? In other words, that's a very different conversation than if we are to debate what is currently legal in the United States and constitutionally protected, which is adult sexual entertainment. Now, again, I'm not here to advocate for that, but I am here to draw the line between child sexual exploitation because this is a solvable problem. Now, here's a very long story short that I've unpacked on many podcasts. We should have eradicated this a long time ago, child sex abuse material, and not only morally and theoretically. What I'm talking about, I have done deep investigations into the realms of adult sexual entertainment, and I have talked to the owners of the platforms who have eradicated child sex abuse material from their platforms. Guess what? The largest online collection of pornography, of all pornography on the internet, do you know what it is?
What is it?
Google Images.
So you touched on a very very dear topic to me. So I'm neither nor against adult consenting sexual entertainment. There are people who choose to do that, and
Right.
I'm not going to be the judge of that. But when it comes and also, I'm not going to debate political views, neither one way or the other, but we have heard in the news the word censorship. And we've heard in the news that COVID information was censored, and we've heard in the news that elections were interfered with and information was censored. So, one of the things that is clear is that online platforms know how to censor. Plus, we're all in receipt of those very targeted advertisements. You have a conversation about, I don't know, that you need eye drops, and suddenly you get an ad for eye drops pop up. So it is absolutely technically possible for the online platforms to completely remove child sexual abuse material off of their platforms. And this is why I would love to see laws passed where businesses are mandated, because one of the things I realized is businesses are not going to move on their own. Not just mandated, those who are federal contractors, but all businesses are required to enforce zero tolerance to child sexual abuse material because it can be removed. And then we can deal with material that's on Chinese servers and whatever other country servers. But the majority of the tech industry is in the US today. And if they were to ban, and if they say, oh, I don't know if she's 19 or 17 and a half, well, we for sure know if somebody is 3 years old. And we for sure know if somebody's 12 years old. And the amount of pornography that's online that is children and minor children is mind boggling. So I believe that you asked me the biggest shortfall is that hasn't happened yet. Uh, I believe that it's responsibility of the corporate board of directors, the shareholders, just all of us, the people, to make that happen. I also think that if companies say, oh, that's too expensive, we can't enforce it, hey, you're returning productive time because a lot of time CSAM is consumed during work hours or on business trips. And I also believe we are grossly underfunded in terms of law enforcement and number of people prosecuting, and therefore HR departments that are already enforcing safety and rules of corporate behavior, they add this item of zero tolerance to CSAM and human trafficking. That's actually going to result in better work performance for the corporations. So I'm very, very strongly advocating for this to hopefully see that come to fruition.
I love it. So I'm going to say something that I've said often. We, the people, will eradicate CSAM in the next 5 years. Now, if they wanted to, it would have already been done. If they wanted to, though, it could be done in 2 weeks. Why? Because the technology already exists. Why do I know that? This is an entire investigation I've done, entire podcast on with a lot more extensive information. I'm just going to summarize right now. Pornhub gets a lot of flack saying that it's a crime scene, that it's infested with child sex abuse material, and all these other accusations. They're also one of the largest, or maybe the largest, pornography site on the internet. I did a lot of investigation into that because of the accusations made against them. It turns out that NCMEC's annual 2023 report, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is the authority on data on this subject, as well as the DOJ, very reputable third parties have verified that the company that owns Pornhub, his name is ALO now, they were purchased under new management in March of 2023. Prior to, there was a lot of bad things before that acquisition, and now since March of 2023, there is zero on all of ALO's platforms, including Pornhub. Now, I'm not here to say that, I'm not a customer again, like I'm not here to market them. What I'm saying is, if Pornhub has done it, what is Google's excuse? Now, let's unpack this further, because on NCMEC's 2023 report, ALO's platforms had zero child sex abuse material. Guess who the biggest offender was? Facebook had 17.8 million instances, followed by Instagram, who had 11 point something million, followed by Google, followed by WhatsApp, followed by Twitter, followed by TikTok, and then Snapchat. So here's where I'm going with this. If they wanted to, they would have, but they don't want to. So what do we need to do? We need to make it a profit-driven incentive for these big corporations to do the things they should have already done. Here's how I believe we can do that. If people knew how solvable it was, how solvable this problem of child sex abuse material is, we could start holding them accountable. So hypothetically, if you knew that XYZ search engine had eradicated child sex abuse material, monitored every piece of content, all of this is doable, Pornhub's already doing this, and requires a consent form for every person pictured in every single piece of content, even if you could only hear their voice, they require a consent form, matching a government ID and all these very extensive forensic checks. What is Google's excuse? Point one. Point two, if XYZ search engine implemented this zero tolerance policy for illegal content, what an idea. Would you or would you not boycott Google, who is the biggest offender, and gravitate towards XYZ search engine? So if we even affected their profits by, let's say, 20%, I believe it would be enough to get their attention and motivate them to do the right thing. That's me playing as dumb as I possibly can, because it is ridiculous that this is still a problem in 2025. It is even more ridiculous that there was an entire debate around taking down a platform as big as TikTok, and that TikTok was taken down for about 12 hours. But, we can't end child sex abuse material. No. We're not here to continue playing stupid, but I am here to smile and wave until these things get sent through. It will take we, the people, making enough noise in the right direction, right? So that's why I'm very passionate, not only about solving the real problems, not the ones we think that our bias tells us to focus on, but the real statistically objective actual problems. And also by coming together, for example, in the advocacy realm, instead of just sort of saying, we don't like things, make them illegal and they'll go away, because I don't see that as realistic. If we could focus on our efforts on, first of all, the low-hanging fruit, things that objectively should not exist and that there are already solutions for. We just need to implement them or enforce the existing laws, for example. Then we can get the attention of these tech giants and say, hey, great, now that we've done that, now let's make sure all the adults here are consensual, all the adults here have consent forms, blah, blah, blah. So it requires this multi-layered approach. And I love meeting people that not only are experts in their realm of whatever this layer is, because there are various layers to this problem, as well as various layers needed in our solutions-oriented approach.
Well, thank you. I agree with you. I agree with you. And on this path, as a lot of organizations do encounter a lot of people who don't speak English, I do encourage making sure that interpreters you're working with are trauma informed, and on the other side, that providers are culturally informed. Because
Absolutely.
the way we interact on that journey and the way we intercept those problems requires those both skills.
Absolutely. So, for advocates or shelters or agencies or caretakers or whoever it is listening today, what are the top 3 or 4 things they should know before hiring a translator or interpreter for trafficking cases?
Well, the first one of the first parts is you want to brief the interpreter about what to expect. It's called a pre-session briefing. You want to brief the interpreter what is going to be taking place. You want to make sure you're working with a professional interpreter who in no way is associated with the trafficking victim, because very often or sometimes the trafficker may say, oh, I'll provide the interpreter. Well, then they're on the same side as the trafficker. Or, I will interpret in this case. And so you want to make sure that the interpreter is truly independent. The interpreter knows what to expect, and that you treat the interpreter as part of the care team in a way, so you don't they're part of your pre-session debrief and post-session debrief as well, because the interpreter most likely will pick up certain things um, uh, that may be of cultural difference or significance. For example, the way we express fear, or the way we express mistrust or distrust may be slightly different depending on what cultural background, and by that, deaf culture is very different from the hearing language culture as well.
That's so important. What are some of the things you wish you would have known when you started in this career, or even when you yourself were looking for those resources?
Oh, um,
Big
what
question.
are some of the things that I wish I would have known? So much. I wish I would have known how much of our communication is actually nonverbal. Words represent only a small percentage of our communication. We actually transmit a lot with our body tone, our body language, and then that whole breadth of communication through nonverbal cues, how we communicate fear, right, and how do we communicate actually happiness. The other part, what is important is nobody can control the way they react, right? We react within a split second and then we react. But we can control about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. We can control of becoming aware of the fact that this situation is highly uncomfortable. We can have the tools of how to navigate it. And so one of the points, and I just share, a point of if you just name the emotion, if you name how you feel uncomfortable in the moment, which is you move your processing from your, amygdala, from your unconscious and subconscious levels to your prefrontal cortex, that alone reduces stress. And some studies shown can reduce stress by as much as even 50%. That awareness allows us to then navigate the situation better. So some of those tools I wish I knew, but I can tell you that some of the encounters that I've been and I've witnessed in have actually left me sick for days, and so I'm sure that our providers deal with those situations as well, and even and so I believe that training is very, very important.
Absolutely agreed with that. So that's a whole topic in itself that I would love to unpack with you. I've gotten very involved in the world of training service members to combat this issue because they're very equipped with the skill sets needed to do a lot on the actual tactical side of combating this. So from law enforcement to government agencies, etc., I work at the Ranch, Texas, where we do a lot of different types of training and we are expanding training. So that's an honor to be a part of. And also, it's sad that these organizations generally don't receive the training they need to be effective at their job. So that's a gap. But even broadening it beyond service members when it comes either hospital staff and caretakers to the translators themselves, as an example. The secondary trauma is something not a lot of people address or are equipped to handle. So we've seen a very high rate of turnover, for example, in caretakers at survivor centers for children who have been trafficked. The adult caretakers have a difficult time dealing with that secondary trauma. And there are not a lot of resources for that. It's not something that's often taken into consideration. I know I've done undercover ops with law enforcement where I've pretended to be a child on the internet. Even something very, because I've done much more extreme things in the world of trafficking, but narrow that all the way down to just identifying pedophiles on the internet, like just pervs on the internet preying on children. We're not even talking about child trafficking. But the things that I've encountered as a hardened, trained adult while pretending to be a child on the internet, they have haunted me for days, weeks, months. It's taken me days, weeks, months to spiritually, mentally, physiologically detoxify from how disgusting all of that is. So, what are some words of wisdom? What's some advice you would give to anyone who is some form of caretaker in this space, whether it's on the combating side of things or the aftercare and trauma informed recovery side? What are some ways they can take care of themselves in the process?
So it's very, so first of all, most of the interpreters, most of the providers, most of the caretakers that I have met have one thing in common. They don't have time, they're overworked, and they cannot take that long retreat, right, to take care of
Yeah,
themselves. So
not
it
do
has to
practice.
be in small portions all the time and every day. It almost has to be a ritual. So I can give a few points. So, like naming the emotion is or what you're experiencing is a very, very useful tool. Knowing that calm is not the point, remaining connected with self at the time of being uncomfortable is key. Being calm is unrealistic expectation. We will react because we're programmed, we're chemically wired, we're biologically wired to react. Another thing is very important to know about our breath, the power of breath, and how to activate the vagus nerve, which is rest and digest system, which is actually very simple. If you inhale on 3 and exhale on 9, or when you exhale, you're blowing out candles on your grandma's cake for her 100th birthday, a lot of them, that immediately activates the vagus nerve, and you may even feel lightheaded or you may feel some type of sensation, but you're automatically activating your rest and digest system. That power of breath, where we can activate calming ourselves down, is also, you can do something like that immediately anytime. And then having a ritual in the way where there are things you can do after the fact. One of the most powerful tools that I have learned from chaplaincy is to have a debrief partner. And chaplains, and we can learn more from chaplaincy on that, they actually train people on how to be a debrief partner. Debrief partner is not you and me going in the depth of the experience. Debrief partner is active listening on the other person's side. And so I'll come to you and I'll say, please be my debrief partner. Then I can talk about what happened to me, necessarily without breaching the confidentiality of the case, because I'm talking about me. I'm not naming any names of engaging in any HIPAA violations or data violations, and you're engaged in an act of active listening, in that case, and you set a time limit for a debrief partner. So it's not, you can say, can you be my debrief partner for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? And actually, it's very, very effective in a way of being able to process a traumatic experience or traumatic situation. So those are just a few tips that both interpreters and professionals in the field and providers can use.
That's so beneficial. Thank you. That's really interesting. I am all about practical strategies because, like you said, yes, it would be ideal to take time off from this work, but that's not practical for most of us. So, finding that moment of reconnection or anchor back to peace. And I'm big on breath work, and it's something I always use in every situation. I've been interrupted in the middle of some deep breaths. That's literally helping me to just come back to baseline because we're going to continue dealing with this intense situation. Give me 2 minutes to do some deep breathing. So that's invaluable. I had a different question going back to the world of translation. With our modern day and age and AI taking over a lot of things, I know a lot of people are using different AI tools for translation. And while that can be very helpful and beneficial and increase efficiency in a lot of different research realms, when it comes to using AI for translation and dealing with people, what are some things people need to know when it comes to very sensitive issues, or specifically, let's talk about related to human trafficking type sensitivity? What do people know about why they need a translator?
So the first important thing is to understand that AI and machine interpreting or machine translation does not cover all languages, right? It may be there for Spanish, but the moment we get outside of the top 20 languages, the amount of hallucination and the amount of incorrect data and lack of training it is big. As technology evolves, and technology will continue to evolve, another piece that is very important is if you're interpreting something, ordering a green shoe versus a blue shoe, and AI hallucinates and comes up with the wrong shoe and you get the wrong order, you're okay. But if you're interpreting something and it's a green wire versus a blue wire and it's a nuclear reactor, you probably want to have an engineer, a nuclear engineer behind that. So the difficulty, so machine translation existed for the last 20 years. And before AI, machine translation would come out awkward, and you would always see when it's clumsy. The difficulty with AI is it comes very smooth, but it can have the exact opposite meaning. And I give you one example. I'm a big apple eater, can be translated as I'm a big person who eats apples. I love eating big apples, so I only eat big apples. And it depends on the context. So when the information is critical, and additionally, AI cannot handle lingo, it cannot handle the slang. And we know that in the trafficking cases, the slang evolves, the slang moves pretty fast, and the slang can mean a completely different thing. And you need to understand what that is. So, using AI interpreting kind of in an immediate situation can help, but sometimes it can hurt. So, if you're trying to find your directions in a new city and you're using AI, great. If you're ordering food at a restaurant, keep in mind risk as an individual. We just had a case where somebody actually ended up dying because somebody were allergic to certain food and it was interpreted incorrectly. And there was another case where one of the things AI interpreting does is blocks background noise, right? Because you just interpret the top communication. There's a recent case with a 911 call where AI was used, and AI blocked the fact that there was violence in the background. And so deputies walked in not knowing that they're walking into a violent situation, and somebody ended up being hurt. So it's a great tool, but you got to know where to use it and how to use it. That would be my advice.
That's a great explanation. Yeah, really trauma informed comes down to the individualized approach. And I think one of the, again, to oversimplify something that's quite complex, one of the things I go hard on when it comes to working with human trafficking survivors or law enforcement or the realms of people trying to combat it is that it's not a one size fits all problem. There is not a one size fits all solution, both in terms of what the individual has experienced, how they feel about it right now, how they'll feel about it in years to come, and also what steps they need next is individual to every single situation. So there are definitely some best practices. There are definitely modalities that we are matching. For example, certain healing and trauma informed therapeutic modalities that we have matched are typically beneficial for certain types of situations that the victim has come out of, as well as certain modalities that are typically not at all helpful for certain situations the victim has come out of. And again, that's not right or wrong by anyone's moral compass. It means for this situation, we need the individualized approach. I asked the question about AI because I had some of the same assumptions that it's not going to pick up on the nuances of human behavior as well as the slang, which is a big part of it, as well as the individualized approach that's needed in this scenario. So it's very, very helpful. So tell us a little bit more about your work and what people should know about it, as well as how can they reach out to you, find out more about your services, and contact you for those kind of situations?
We specialize in providing language access. We have all of the modalities, spoken language and person interpreters for both spoken languages and sign languages, certified deaf interpreters, which people may not know about, but there are many cases where a person grew up in a very, let's say, isolated situation. They may not speak your traditional American Sign Language. They may speak a certain dialect, or somebody maybe from a different country. By the way, there's over 300 sign languages spoken in the world today. So we do provide, again, sign language interpreters. We do provide written translation, over the phone interpreting, video remote interpreting. So any form of language access, and on full spectrum from fully human with extra quota control to fully automated, depending on where, with human oversight. So we provide a full spectrum of services. We also have MasterWord Institute, where we do train interpreters on trauma-informed interpreting and other skills. Important for interpreters, how to interpret in healthcare settings. And of course, we provide training for providers as well. We're very actively involved. I'm personally, us as a team, also very actively involved in advocating and against human trafficking and trying to raise awareness and education about human trafficking.
Very cool. I love your work. I'm a huge fan, and I really want to thank you for what you're doing.
Thank
Like,
you.
to acknowledge you as an individual for doing what you've done for the last, you said almost 2 decades, is that right? Or over 2 decades now? That's impressive, because not a lot of people are able to stick with it that long. It's very difficult work. So I want to acknowledge you not only for being such a light in this darkness and bringing so many people to light with you and being such a strong pillar for your team, but thank you truly for the work that you're doing, because it matters and we need more people to focus in on these disciplines that can help bridge these gaps in society.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you very much for the work that you do. And thank you for the opportunity to be on this podcast.
Absolutely. I look forward to working more with you and learning more about what you guys do. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to next time.